Emily Sanders thought she was just getting a ride home. Martin Cole had been planning her abduction for months. What began as an ordinary Sunday night in a quiet town became the start of a horrifying journey. And what Emily uncovered after her escape was something no one could have imagined. Emily Sanders had always been predictable in the best way. She arrived early to work, texted her roommate when she was on her way home, and never made spontaneous decisions. That's why, when she didn't return home one quiet Sunday night in September, it sent a ripple of confusion through the people closest to her. At first, it didn't feel like an emergency. People disappear temporarily for all kinds of reasons: dead phone batteries, surprise plans, maybe even a misunderstanding. But none of those explanations sat right with her roommate, Haley, who had lived with Emily for nearly 2 years. Emily didn't do surprises. She especially wouldn't vanish without a word. Earlier that evening, Emily had worked the closing shift at Crescent Diner, a family-owned spot on the edge of Crestwood, a small town where news traveled faster than cars. Her coworkers remembered her wiping down tables with her usual focus, chatting briefly about an upcoming exam she was dreading, and clocking out at 9:30 p.m. A few minutes later, she sent Haley a short text, "Getting a ride, be home soon." That message was timestamped 9:37 p.m. Then nothing. The diner had a few security cameras installed around the back entrance and parking lot. Footage showed Emily walking out the door at 9:43 p.m., tying her sweater around her waist, and approaching a car parked in the shadows. It was a dark-colored sedan, possibly gray or black. The video quality was poor, and the streetlights did little to help. She opened the passenger door, got in, and the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the street. There was no sign of panic in her movements, no hesitation, no indication that she felt unsafe. It looked like she recognized the driver. When Haley called the police the next morning, she expected them to dismiss her concerns. But Crestwood wasn't the kind of place where adults vanished without warning. By the afternoon, detectives were already reviewing the footage and calling Emily's friends and co-workers. The car's license plate wasn't clearly visible in the video. Whatever angle the camera had, it missed the details. It was just one more frustration in a growing list of dead ends. By Tuesday, the story had spread across town. Emily's face appeared on flyers, local news broadcasts, and social media. Candlelight vigils were organized outside the diner. Her professors and classmates at the nearby community college joined the search efforts, posting updates and organizing volunteer teams. Police continued examining the footage frame by frame. They managed to identify the make of the car, a Nissan Altima, mid-2000s model, but couldn't determine the year or color with certainty. The driver's face was obscured by a baseball cap and, strangely, sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. The investigation quickly turned technical. Officers checked all registered Altimas in the county, then the surrounding counties, but came up empty. They expanded the search to include similar vehicles with expired tags, stolen registrations, and even out-of-state listings. Nothing matched. It was as if the car had never existed. Emily's phone was last pinged near the diner at 9:45 p.m. Then it went dark. No calls, no messages, no data. Her bank account hadn't been touched, her credit cards weren't used, and there was no online activity. It was like she had been erased. Some people speculated she'd run away. Others suspected she'd planned to meet someone in secret. But those who knew Emily best knew how impossible that was. She didn't take risks. She didn't lie. And she had no reason to vanish. 1 week passed, then another. Police began reaching out to national databases, expanding their search in case she had crossed state lines. A few tips trickled in. People thought they saw her at a gas station, on a bus, at a motel, but none of them led anywhere. The image of her stepping into the car became the last known moment of her existence. Her family clung to hope. Her mother insisted Emily was still alive somewhere. Her father refused to stop driving around town at night, just in case he spotted something. Friends organized fundraisers to keep the search alive. But the days dragged on, and the silence remained. Something had happened to Emily Sanders that night, something no one could explain, and whoever was behind it had left no trace. Detectives assigned to Emily Sanders' disappearance knew they were working against time. The longer a person was missing, the harder it became to find them alive. What made Emily's case so confounding was the lack of any clear motive. She wasn't involved with drugs, had no criminal record, no stalkers or dangerous exes, and no sudden changes in behavior. Her social life was small but close-knit. Her digital footprint showed nothing unusual. No secret messages, no late-night calls, no encrypted apps. It was as though she had been plucked from her routine by someone completely outside her circle. The key piece of evidence remained the security footage. Technicians were brought in to enhance the image, frame by frame, hoping to catch even the smallest detail. A sticker on the bumper, a reflection in the window, a clearer shot of the driver. Eventually, one thing did emerge: the car had a toll tag on the windshield. This detail, almost invisible in the original video, opened a new path. Authorities began digging through records from nearby toll booths, focusing on the time frame right after Emily disappeared. Roughly 45 minutes after she got into the car, a toll tag was registered heading westbound out of town. Investigators cross-referenced the timestamp with the possible car models and zeroed in on one unusual match. The tag was registered to a Carl Mendez, except Carl Mendez had died 5 years ago. A boating accident, according to public records. His vehicle registration had long since expired, and his information should have been dormant. But someone had reactivated the toll tag under his name just 6 weeks prior to Emily's disappearance. It was a disturbing find. Someone had deliberately used a dead man's identity to stay anonymous on the road. This wasn't a random act. Whoever had taken Emily had planned it carefully. As investigators followed the route the car had likely taken, they discovered something else. About an hour and a half west of Crestwood, a rural farmer called the local sheriff to report something strange on his property. In a clearing behind his barn, there were fresh tire tracks, cigarette butts, and what appeared to be torn fabric. It wasn't an area anyone had access to. It was private land, far from any main road. The farmer had initially ignored the site, assuming it was just local kids sneaking in. But when he heard about the missing girl, he felt compelled to call it in. Detectives arrived at the scene within hours. The clearing was quiet, overgrown, and surrounded by trees. They found a single sneaker lying in the grass, partially covered by leaves. It was a women's size 7, Emily's exact size. The brand and style also matched what her roommate said she owned. No other clothing or items were discovered. But there were faint drag marks in the dirt, suggesting something or someone had been pulled from one side of the clearing to the other. A dog unit was brought in, but the scent trail led nowhere. Later that night, before the evidence could be fully collected, a fire broke out in the same clearing. By morning, most of the area had been reduced to ash. Investigators believed it had been deliberately set to destroy any remaining evidence. Accelerant was found in the soil. The fire hadn't spread beyond the clearing, burning only the area where the items had been found. It was too precise to be accidental. The development shifted the tone of the investigation from hopeful to grim. The chance that Emily had willingly left town with someone grew increasingly unlikely. Now it seemed clear that she had been taken, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide the trail. The burning of the site was a bold move. It meant the person responsible had been watching, knew they had been close to being discovered, and acted quickly to erase any trace. With each day that passed, the case grew darker. The media picked up on the story again, this time painting a portrait not of a missing girl, but of a well-organized predator who had managed to disappear without a trace. The internet buzzed with speculation. Some believed she had been targeted by a serial abductor. Others suggested she had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to see. But the police, sifting through incomplete data and ghost-like evidence, had little more than guesses. And somewhere out there, someone was watching. The fire at the clearing had obliterated nearly all physical evidence, but investigators weren't ready to give up. Arson specialists combed through the ashes, collecting anything that hadn't turned to dust. They found small remnants: a partially melted blade of a folding pocket knife, fragments of a blackened cell phone casing, and a scrap of fabric that had survived in the base of a shallow hole. The fabric had faint traces of blood, enough to be sent in for DNA analysis. Days later, the results came back. The blood belonged to Emily Sanders. The hope that she had simply run away dissolved with that single report. For detectives, this was the confirmation they didn't want. Emily had been harmed, possibly killed, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. But as grim as it seemed, there was also now a direction. The investigation shifted focus. If Emily's case was no longer just a missing person, but potentially a homicide, the resources devoted to it increased. New units were brought in, including analysts familiar with behavioral profiling. The troubling detail was the precision. Whoever took Emily hadn't panicked. From the car with the altered toll tag to the controlled fire in a remote field, everything had been done deliberately. The case began to attract federal attention. A pattern was starting to emerge, not just in the method of disappearance, but in the eerie quiet that followed. There were no calls, no ransom demands, no public sightings that held up. The absence of chaos suggested something chilling. This wasn't the first time the perpetrator had done this. An analyst assigned to the case began comparing Emily's disappearance with old files from surrounding counties. She filtered cases involving young women who vanished after work, particularly those involving restaurants, late-night shifts, and rural roads. What she found sent a jolt through the team. In the past 8 years, 3 other women had disappeared under nearly identical circumstances. The first was Lee Brooks, a 21-year-old waitress from a neighboring town who disappeared after texting her sister that she was catching a ride home. She was last seen getting into a car outside a cafe where she worked. No vehicle was identified. No body was found. Then there was Heather Munn, who left a gas station convenience store after her shift and vanished without a trace. Finally, there was Talia Jefferson, a college student who worked nights at a food truck and was seen getting into a black SUV. Her disappearance received little media attention at the time. Her family insisted she'd been kidnapped, but without evidence, the case had stagnated. With Emily's case now fitting the same profile, the connection felt undeniable. Each woman had been around the same age, worked in low-risk environments, and disappeared after texting someone they were heading home with a ride. Each had last been seen entering a vehicle they seemed to recognize. And each time the vehicle had vanished. Untraceable, generic, always just far enough outside the camera's range. Investigators began to refer to the unknown perpetrator as the ride-home killer. The name stuck, even though no confirmed bodies had been recovered. What was more disturbing was that the killer had potentially gone undetected for nearly a decade. Emily's case, by chance or misstep, had left just enough of a trail to revive all the others. The discovery intensified public interest. News outlets began covering the story with renewed focus. Families of the other missing girls came forward, sharing their pain and their frustrations with how quickly their cases had faded from the spotlight. But for police, the breakthrough was more than symbolic. It offered the first glimpse into a pattern that could be broken. Then something unexpected happened. 2 weeks after the clearing fire, a man dumpster diving behind a gas station 3 states away found a charred ID card. It was Emily Sanders' student ID, singed around the edges, but still legible. He turned it in to a clerk, who contacted police after recognizing the name from the national coverage. Security footage from the gas station was reviewed. In it, a young woman entered the store briefly around 20:15 a.m., barefoot and wearing oversized clothing. Her face was bruised, her movements slow and hesitant. She bought a bottle of water and a protein bar. She looked directly into the security camera for a few seconds. It was Emily. She had been alive, at least as of that moment. But by the time law enforcement arrived at the gas station, she was gone again. The grainy footage from the gas station changed everything. For the first time since her disappearance, Emily Sanders was seen alive. Although her condition appeared fragile, bruised, barefoot, and disoriented, she was moving on her own. It was clear she had escaped from wherever she'd been held. The news sent shockwaves through the investigation team. For weeks, they'd operated under the assumption that she might no longer be alive. Now, hope returned, but it came with new urgency. Whoever had taken her was still out there, and she was still in danger. Agents swarmed the gas station in the remote Nevada town, retracing her path in every direction. They searched fields, abandoned buildings, and interviewed anyone who had been near the store in the early hours of that morning. A truck driver recalled seeing a woman on the side of the highway, about 2 miles away, walking barefoot, looking panicked. He hadn't stopped, assuming it was a domestic dispute or someone under the influence. By the time officers canvassed the area, Emily had vanished again. Still, she had left behind new clues. Surveillance footage showed that she had approached the counter but spoken to no one. She used a debit card to make her purchase. A surprising move, considering it could be tracked. Investigators speculated she had done it deliberately, to leave a breadcrumb trail. That theory gained traction when a second sighting came in 2 days later, 60 miles northeast of the gas station. A hiker found an old tarp shelter in a ravine. Beneath it were two items: a crushed water bottle and a scrap of cardboard with a scribbled message written in black ink. It read only two words: "He watches." This cryptic note fueled a terrifying possibility. Emily had escaped, but she was still being pursued. Law enforcement expanded the search zone, focusing on rest stops, RV parks, and off-grid settlements. Their assumption was that the person holding her had chosen remote areas to avoid detection, and Emily had used the brief window of opportunity to run. Soon after, another discovery pushed the case into a darker realm. About 15 miles from the gas station, police found an abandoned RV parked on an overgrown dirt trail. Inside, they uncovered what could only be described as a personal shrine to Emily and other missing women. Photos, torn pieces of clothing, and handwritten notes were pinned to the walls. There were also maps marked with X and a list of dates spanning back over a decade. But the most chilling discovery was in the small closet at the back of the RV. Dozens of driver's licenses and ID cards belonging to other missing women were organized in neat rows. All of the women previously linked to the so-called ride-home killer were among them. Some had never been connected to each other until now. In total, 17 different names were identified. Alongside the IDs was a journal. Inside were detailed entries describing how each woman had been selected, followed, approached, and eventually abducted. Emily's name was mentioned more than once with chilling precision. The entries mentioned her routine, her habits, even specific outfits she had worn. It was clear that her abduction had been planned for months. The man responsible was identified through partial fingerprints and DNA left behind in the RV. His name was Martin Cole, a former private investigator from Arizona who had disappeared years earlier after faking his own death. His trail had gone cold until now. It appeared Cole had used his background to meticulously avoid surveillance, using stolen identities, untraceable phones, and cash transactions to stay hidden. He was a ghost who knew exactly how to remain invisible. Authorities launched a nationwide manhunt. Emily's face was now accompanied by his on every news outlet, alerting the public to report any sightings. But even as Cole's identity became public, he remained a step ahead. By the time investigators reached his last known safe house, he had already fled. Inside, they found more disturbing evidence: audio recordings of victims, carefully organized files, and another list labeled only as candidates. Emily's name had been crossed out. What began as a single missing person case had now unraveled into something far more horrifying. A methodical predator had been operating for years, and Emily Sanders was the only known survivor. But her escape hadn't ended her nightmare. It had only raised the stakes. And with Martin Cole still out there, the race to find her became more desperate than ever. Emily Sanders was finally found 6 days after her appearance at the Nevada gas station. A truck driver noticed a woman curled beneath a billboard off a remote stretch of highway near the Utah border. She was severely dehydrated, sunburned, and barely conscious. Authorities confirmed her identity within hours. She had made it, barely. The news spread quickly: the girl who had vanished with a stranger had survived. But what followed was not a simple celebration. Emily's story was not just one of survival. It was a revelation of something far more chilling than anyone had imagined. She was transported to a secure medical facility under federal protection. Physically, she was recovering. But emotionally, her trauma ran deep. Through careful interviews with trained professionals, details began to surface. Details that shifted the case from a twisted series of abductions to something far more complex. Emily recounted waking up in a trailer she didn't recognize, restrained but alive. The man who had taken her, Martin Cole, rarely spoke, except to issue instructions or threats. But over time, she picked up fragments of conversations, muffled voices through walls, and glimpses of other people. According to her, Martin wasn't working alone. He spoke often of others, men and women, who helped girls disappear. Emily couldn't identify them, and she never saw anyone clearly. But she was certain Martin was part of a network. She described being moved between isolated locations, often in the middle of the night, sedated and blindfolded. Each place was more remote than the last. She was rarely left alone, yet it was in one brief moment of negligence, during a food run, that she escaped. She broke a window in the trailer, sliced her hand in the process, and ran until her legs gave out. She lived off stolen snacks, puddle water, and pure will. Investigators were stunned. They had believed Martin Cole was a lone predator, but now there were hints of a larger, more organized operation. The journal entries, the candidates list, the detailed files, all of it took on a new meaning. It wasn't just obsession, it was recruitment, selection, a system. When law enforcement tried to track down others possibly connected to Cole, they hit a wall. The people mentioned by Emily, if real, were ghosts without names, faces, or traces. And Martin Cole was no longer in any known location. His digital trail had gone cold, and he hadn't used any bank cards or phones. It was as if he had disappeared again. A month after Emily was rescued, another body was found in the desert near one of the suspected locations where she had been held. It was confirmed to be Heather Munn, one of the earlier victims believed to be linked to the ride-home killer. The discovery, though tragic, provided confirmation that the pattern had always led to death, until Emily. She had broken the cycle. Emily's recovery remained private. Her family moved her to an undisclosed location, and her identity was legally changed for her protection. She gave one official statement through her attorney, expressing gratitude for the efforts to bring her home but asking for privacy. She never spoke publicly again. As the investigation continued, authorities remained uncertain whether Martin Cole had acted as part of a larger group or had invented the idea to manipulate and control his victims. No additional suspects were ever arrested, and no new leads surfaced. The case was formally closed 3 years later, classified as solved with one known perpetrator and several confirmed victims. But many in law enforcement believed the full truth had never been uncovered. Emily Sanders' survival became the subject of books, podcasts, and documentaries. Her face became a symbol of resilience, but to those who worked on the case, her eyes in the footage told another story. One of fear that hadn't left, even in freedom. The story faded from headlines in time, replaced by new tragedies. Yet for those who followed it closely, one question never truly left: if Martin Cole was able to operate for so long, so precisely, was he really the only one? The idea haunted everyone who had come near the case. And though Emily escaped the stranger she vanished with, the world she'd emerged from remained hidden, quiet, and deeply unsettling. Some mysteries, it seemed, weren't meant to be solved.